This is Prison and Pot, Marijuana Legalization and Incarceration Levels, a quantitative study of prison data. So in 2012, Washington and Colorado became the first states in the country to legalize recreational marijuana. Since then, 18 others and the nation's capital have followed suit. Reducing racial disparities in arrests was, among many others, one of the reasons these bills were passed into law. According to the ACLU, African Americans are over 3 times more likely than whites to be arrested for marijuana. Also, according to the ACLU, minorities often bear the brunt of unequal enforcement of drug laws. In the US, Blacks have been disproportionately more likely to be arrested for cannabis possession than whites, despite a similar rate of cannabis use, as indicated by the 2 graphics on this slide. Our research question was to examine existing prison data and see, has marijuana legalization had an effect on the racial makeup of prisons? Next slide. So our background literature examined 3 previous studies looking at similar but also slightly different things. 2 of these studies were done in Washington and 1 was done in the state of California. They examined arrests and citation levels before, during, and after cannabis legalization and decriminalization. In one of these studies in Washington, cannabis possession arrest rates declined over 70% among the adults after the implementation of cannabis decriminalization. In 11 other states, decriminalization was associated with a roughly 17% decrease in racial disparities in arrest rates between Blacks and whites. And as you can see by the graphic on the screen, this is from the study done in Washington that shows arrest rates for cannabis possession before, during the period of legalization, and after the recreational market opened over the period of January of 2012 to November of 2015. Next slide.
Hi, I'm Sophia, and I'll be talking about the methodology for our research. We decided the best way to approach our question was by using a quantitative research method, which means we didn't have to use sampling. Conveniently, the Vera Institute of Justice website had all the data we needed. So for each state that has decriminalized marijuana, we input the data into Google Sheets doc. And the data we looked at included the total population of prisons as well as their racial makeup. It was decided that for both of these variables, we would input the data for the year of decriminalization, as well as all 5 years before and after legalization. For the states that had substantial data, we calculated the percentage of each race that occupied the prison population during the year of marijuana legalization and the most recent year with accessible data. After, we calculated the rate of change between the year of legalization and the most recent year with data. Finally, the data was represented visually by putting it into charts. Most of the ethical issues were mitigated as the data used is available to the public and created prior to our research. But a possible problem of bias about our topic was circumvented by trying to stay neutral and focusing purely on the data presented to us. Next slide.
Hi, I'm Ella, and I'll be talking about findings and analysis. We examined the rate of change for all of the states with usable data for overall prison population and 5 racial groups, which are AAPI, Black or African American, Latinx, Native American, and white individuals. The states with usable data were Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Colorado, California, Maine, Massachusetts, and DC. We calculated these percentages for each state and then averaged all percentages together for overall change in decriminalized states. In total, prisons that decriminalized marijuana and had usable data have seen a 5.9% decrease in prison population since decriminalization. AAPI individuals making up the prison has decreased by 0.18%, Black individuals by 1.4%, Latinx individuals by 1.54%, and white individuals by 0.6%. Native Americans are the only population that has increased since decriminalization by 1.1%. Next slide. based on those percentages, we can conclude at this time that the decriminalization of marijuana is not having a statistically significant impact on the racial makeup of prisons in the US. Based on our background literature, we did anticipate perhaps more of a decrease in the Black proportion of prison population. However, previous studies also didn't find a significant change in prison data, so that's consistent with our findings. And we hypothesized that this lack of change could be due to other factors such as the pandemic or the 2016 election of Donald Trump also impacting racial makeup. Additionally, minor marijuana charges did not lead to prison time in the first place, which might be why it's not having a huge impact on prisons. And our final hypothesis is that there might not have been enough time that's passed since decriminalization in most of these states to track noticeable change yet.
I'm Mina. I'll be talking about the limitations. So our data doesn't account for confounding factors. So other policies or changes throughout the years that could affect prison population can result in the changes that we've seen. So for example, there was a change in presidency in 2016, which could involve a spike in Latinx prison population, given that Trump kind of targeted Latin American immigrants. We also had a global pandemic, which could affect more recent data, given that prisons didn't really accommodate for the illness very well, which could lead to deaths in the prisons. There's also a mere lack of data, given that many states are yet to legalize marijuana, and one of the ones that have, it's relatively recently, as you can see in the chart on the top right corner. Just the dark green states are the ones that have legalized it. So there's a lot that aren't available with data. Legalization happened in different years for different states as well. So the earliest, I believe, is 2014, and it's all the way up to 2020. So there's not consistency with regards to confounding factors that may have happened in those years. And lastly, there's racial disparities in the data because Latinx people, although they're overrepresented in prison, they're estimated lower than their actual representation for marijuana use.
Hi, my name is Sahar, and I will be talking about the conclusion. Overall, we were not able to conclude that there were any statistically relevant effects of the decriminalization of marijuana on the racial makeup of jails and prisons, but for future research, we thought that it may be reasonable to wait longer before conducting future research on this topic because of the lack of data at this time. Also, future research could expand on our study by looking specifically at arrests on marijuana charges because it could narrow down the trends specifically relating to the legalization of marijuana. And lastly, future studies could look at how charges for marijuana possession, use, or distribution varied by race by using qualitative interviews of incarcerated or formerly incarcerated people, or by looking at sentence lengths for different people, the same charge to find racial disparities.